I'm Alicia Willis, a former Army sergeant fresh back from the desert hellscape, only to step into a different kind of hell, one 1,000 times colder, right inside my own home. I never thought the deadliest enemy wouldn't be the terrorists across the ocean, but the people who call themselves family. The moment I shoved that heavy oak door open against the Montana blizzard, the stench of neglect hit me harder than the smell of gunpowder ever did. My grandfather, Arthur Ellison, 86 years old, the man who built this ranch with his bare hands, was curled up on the freezing floor. His jaw was clamped shut, refusing to let a cry escape, surrounded by dried blood and a note scrawled in my stepmother's lipstick. "We're off to Vegas. Old man is a drag. Handle it yourself." They thought he would die tonight. They thought I was dead on the battlefield. But they were wrong. If you want to know the price of throwing your parents away like trash in the dead of winter, then listen closely. Let me know where you are listening from, comment justice, and subscribe to the channel if you believe that those who abandon the elderly for money deserve an ending worse than death. The wind outside the cabin howled like a dying wolf, rattling the window panes of the Bitterroot Valley Ranch, but the silence inside was louder. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The moment I saw him, the switch in my brain flipped. The part of me that was Alicia, the granddaughter who used to sit on his knee and listen to stories about logging in the 60s, wanted to scream. I wanted to fall to my knees and vomit. But Sergeant Willis didn't let that happen. That version of me, the one forged in the heat of Kandahar and the dust of Helmand Province, took over the controls. Controlled panic. That's what they call it in training. You acknowledge the fear, you box it up, and you shove it into the back of your mind so your hands stop shaking long enough to save a life. I dropped my duffel bag. It hit the floor with a thud that echoed in the freezing hallway. "Grandpa," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Sharp. Command presence. I was at his side in 2 seconds. My knees hit the hardwood floor, sliding on a layer of grime. He was curled in the fetal position near the cold hearth, his body rigid. ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. The drill instructor's voice barked in my head. I pulled off my gloves and pressed my fingers to his carotid artery. His skin was like ice, not just cold, but that waxy, hard texture that nightmares are made of. No shivering. That was bad. That was terrifying. When the body stops shivering, it means the system is shutting down. It's surrendering. "Stay with me, old man," I whispered, leaning my ear to his mouth. His breath was shallow, a ragged, hitching rasp that smelled of ketones and something else. Something grainy and dry. I performed a quick sweep of his mouth to clear the airway. My finger hooked something gritty on his tongue. I pulled it out, squinting in the dim light filtering through the snow-covered windows. It was a small brown triangle, a piece of kibble. I froze. My eyes darted to the corner of the room. The cat's food bowl was overturned on the floor, scattered across the rug. My stomach lurched violently. I looked at the kitchen. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar. I could see from here, even in the shadows, that the shelves were bare. Empty wire racks. Not a carton of milk, not a slice of cheese, nothing. My grandfather, the man who had owned half the timber in this county, the man who had put food on the tables of 50 employees for 40 years, had been trying to eat cat food because he was starving to death in his own home. A wave of pure, white-hot rage blinded me for a second, hotter than the desert sun. I wanted to kill them. I wanted to hunt Linda and Tyler down and flay them alive. "Focus, Willis." Emotions later, survival now. I checked his pulse again. Thready, erratic. He was deep in stage 2, hypothermia. The golden hour wasn't an hour anymore. I had minutes before his heart simply stopped beating from the cold. "We gotta get you warm, Arthur," I said, reverting to using his first name, a trick to keep him grounded. His clothes were soaked. Urine? He had lost bladder control, likely hours ago, and the wet fabric was sucking the last bit of heat from his frail body. I didn't bother with buttons. His flannel shirt was stiff with grime anyway. I pulled my Gerber multi-tool from my belt, flicked the blade open, and sliced. I cut through the shirt, then the thermal undershirt, peeling the wet fabric away from his translucent skin. He moaned, a low-pained sound that tore at my heart as the cold air hit his chest. I know. It sucks. I got you. I kicked my heavy boots off. I stripped off my heavy parka, my fleece, down to my t-shirt. I grabbed the whoopee, my old, battered military poncho liner that I never traveled without, and the thick wool blanket from the back of the sofa. I dragged him onto the rug, away from the drafty door. I wrapped the blankets around us, creating a cocoon, and pulled his icy skeletal frame against me. Skin to skin. It's the most efficient way to transfer heat in the field. I wrapped my legs around his, pulling his back against my chest, burying his head under my chin. I rocked him, just slightly. The house was 30 degrees inside, maybe less. Outside, Montana was screaming at 20 below zero. But in here, under this wool and nylon, I was a furnace. I forced my own body to radiate heat, willing my blood to warm his. You're not checking out on me, Sergeant, I whispered into his hair, which smelled of dust and neglect. I didn't survive an IED in the Arghandab Valley just to come home and lose you to a damn draft. 10 minutes passed. An eternity. The silence of the house pressed in on us. I could hear the wind, the settling of the timber beams, and the slow, struggling beat of his heart against my ribs. Then, a twitch, a shudder. He took a deep, gasping breath. Then he started to shake. Violent, racking shivers. Good, I soothed him, rubbing his arms vigorously. Shake it out, that's good. Shivering meant his body was fighting back. He was coming back from the edge. He coughed, his eyes fluttering open. They were milky with age and confusion. He tried to turn his head, his neck muscles straining. Alicia? His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Lishy. I'm here, Grandpa. I'm home. He blinked, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. He looked ashamed. He tried to pull away, to hide his nakedness, his weakness. This was a man of the mountains, a man of pride. I made a mess. He wheezed, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I'm such a burden. Just let me go. My heart shattered. I tightened my grip on him, fierce and possessive. You are not a burden, I hissed, my voice trembling with the effort to hold back tears. You are my father. You are the only father I have ever known. Do not say that. My eyes lifted from his face to the dining table. The note was still there, weighted down by a pepper shaker. Even from here, I could see the bright, obnoxious shade of Linda's favorite lipstick, cherry red. She wore it like armor. Off to Vegas. They were probably popping champagne right now, probably laughing at the slots, spending his pension checks, thinking about how they'd redecorate this living room once the old nuisance was finally in the ground. I thought, you were gone, Grandpa whispered. I said, my jaw tightening until it ached. But I'm back, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again. I held him until the shivering subsided to a manageable tremble. I checked his pulse again, stronger, still fast, but rhythmic. He was stable. I need to get you water, I said gently. Warm water. Don't move. I tucked the blankets tighter around him and stood up. My body felt light, drained of adrenaline but filled with a new, dark purpose. I walked to the kitchen, stepping over the spilled cat food. I needed to clear the trash. The smell was unbearable. I opened the cabinet under the sink to toss some paper towels in, and that's when I saw it. Sitting right on top of a pile of empty TV dinner boxes and coffee grounds was a small orange pill bottle. I reached in and plucked it out. Digoxin, 125 mcg. Prescribed to Arthur Ellison. I checked the date. It had been filled 3 days ago. It should have been full. I popped the cap. Empty. I shook it upside down. Not even a dusting of powder. My blood ran cold, colder than the blizzard outside. Linda hadn't just forgotten to feed him. She hadn't just left him to freeze. Digoxin controls his heart rate. Without it, he dies. With too much of it, he dies. The bottle was empty. They didn't just leave him. They took his lifeline away and threw it in the trash like a used napkin. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't abandonment. I squeezed the plastic bottle until it cracked in my hand. I looked back at the shivering old man on the floor and then at the lipstick note on the table. This was attempted murder. The only light in the living room came from the dying embers in the stone hearth and the tactical flashlight I had set on the coffee table. Outside, the Montana blizzard had turned into a low, mournful howl, battering the log walls like a wild animal trying to get in. I sat in the armchair across from the sofa where I had made a makeshift bed for Grandpa. My hands were busy, moving with a muscle memory that didn't require conscious thought. Disassemble, wipe, oil, reassemble. My Sig Sauer P320 lay in pieces on a clean rag. The smell of gun oil mixed with the scent of old wood smoke and the lingering copper tang of the blood I'd cleaned off the floor earlier. Grandpa Arthur was sleeping now, his breathing still raspy but steady. Every time he hitched a breath, my heart skipped a beat. I watched his chest rise and fall, counting the seconds. In, out. It was in this silence, this heavy, suffocating vigil, that the ghosts started to creep out of the woodwork. I looked at the family portrait hanging above the mantel. It was taken 5 years ago. My father was still alive then, standing tall and proud. I was in my dress blues, having just made sergeant. But the focus of the picture wasn't us. It was Linda, standing dead center in a shimmering dress that cost more than my first car, and Tyler, looking bored and smug in a suit that didn't fit him. I remembered the day Dad died. A heart attack, they said. Quick, painless. I remembered the funeral even better. It was a rainy Tuesday. Linda had thrown herself onto the casket, sobbing so loud the priest had to pause the eulogy. She played the grieving widow to perfection, clutching a lace handkerchief, accepting condolences from the town council members. But I was standing right behind her. I saw what the neighbors didn't. Every time she wiped her eyes, her gaze didn't go to my father's picture. It darted to the man in the gray suit standing by the exit, the family attorney. She wasn't crying for her husband. She was crying because the reading of the will wasn't happening fast enough. I snapped the slide back onto my pistol with a sharp metallic click. That was just the beginning. The real rot had set in years before that. My mind drifted back to Thanksgiving, 10 years ago. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the roasting turkey and sage stuffing. It was supposed to be a day of gratitude. The house was full of relatives. The dining table was groaning under the weight of glazed ham, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pies. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses of wine, everyone except me. I was in the kitchen, elbow deep in greasy gray dishwater. "Alicia, honey," Linda had said, sweeping into the kitchen with a half-eaten drumstick in her hand. "The dishwasher is acting up again. You don't mind doing these by hand, do you? You know how Tyler gets if he misses the kickoff." From the living room, I heard the roar of the TV. The Dallas Cowboys had just scored. I heard Tyler cheering, his mouth probably full of the food I'd helped prepare. I heard my father laughing at something Linda said. I stood there for 3 hours. I scrubbed the roasting pan until my knuckles were raw and red. I scraped the plates of the people who were supposed to be my family. By the time I finished, the food on the stove was cold. The stuffing had formed a hard crust. I ate alone at the kitchen counter, listening to them celebrate in the other room. I wasn't a daughter that day. I was the help. I was the inconvenience that came with the marriage. I racked the slide of my gun, checking the action. Smooth. It wasn't just the emotional neglect, it was the financial sabotage. I remembered the summer I graduated high school. I'd been accepted to State University. I had a plan. I just needed help with the tuition. I sat Linda and Dad down at this very table. "We just can't do it, Alicia," Linda had said, sighing as if it pained her physically. "The ranch had a bad year. Money is tight, you understand, don't you? We all have to make sacrifices." I had nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I understood sacrifice. I was ready to work 2 jobs. 2 weeks later, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. It wasn't farm equipment. It was a brand new cherry red Ford Mustang. For Tyler. He didn't have a job. He had barely scraped through high school with a D average. But there he was, revving the engine, grinning like he had earned it. He needs a reliable car to look for work, Linda had beamed, patting the hood. It's an investment in his future. An investment. That afternoon, I didn't cry. I walked 5 miles into town. I walked right past the university admissions office and straight into the Army Recruitment Center. I need money for college, I told the recruiter, and I need to get as far away from here as possible. I signed the papers that day. The GI Bill was the only way I was going to make something of myself. I traded 4 years of my life, my sanity, and the risk of death in the sandbox just to get the education that Tyler was handed on a silver platter. An education he never even used. And Tyler, the golden boy? He didn't look for work. He looked for trouble. I looked down at the floor where I'd found Grandpa earlier. The scratches on the hardwood told a story. 6 months ago, Grandpa had called me in a panic while I was stationed in Germany. His pension check was gone. His savings account had been drained. $2,000 vanished overnight. I knew who did it. We all knew. Tyler had a gambling problem. He bet on everything: NFL, college ball, even the weather. When I confronted Linda over the phone, her voice turned shrill. He's just a boy, Alicia. He made a mistake. He thought he had a sure thing on the Super Bowl. Don't be so harsh. Family forgives. Family forgives. That was her mantra. But in Linda's dictionary, forgive meant, let us bleed you dry and shut up about it. They let Tyler steal from an 86-year-old man, and then, when there was nothing left to steal, they left that man to freeze to death while they went to Vegas to spend the last of the equity. I looked at Grandpa sleeping under the pile of blankets. He looked so small, so fragile. If you are listening to this and you know exactly how it feels to be the black sheep while the lazy ones get everything, hit that like button right now. I want you to leave a comment below. Just type respect if you believe that respect is earned, not given, and that no parent should ever play favorites. Let me know I'm not alone in this fight. I holstered the gun and set it on the table next to me. The anger was good. It kept me warm. It kept me sharp. I closed my eyes for a second, just trying to rest them. Rang! The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot. My eyes snapped open. My hand was on the grip of my pistol before I even registered what the sound was. It was the old landline phone on the wall in the kitchen. We never used that phone. Only telemarketers called that line, and nobody calls at 2 a.m. in a blizzard. The ringing echoed through the empty house, loud and jarring. Ring, ring, ring. I stood up, moving silently in my socks. I walked into the kitchen, the cold air from the window biting at my face. I stared at the phone. It looked like a trap. I picked up the receiver slowly. Hello? Silence. Who is this? I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. There were no words, just the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing. And then, in the background, beneath the static, I heard a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the sound of the wind. But not the wind outside my window. It was the sound of wind whistling through a cell phone microphone. Someone was outside, watching the house, watching me. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a monotonous drone that felt like a countdown. I placed the receiver back on the cradle slowly, my eyes never leaving the dark window above the kitchen sink. Someone was out there, or had been out there. The wind whistled through the eaves, but the house felt different now. It wasn't just a cold, neglected ranch anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was the first responder. Grandpa stays put, I whispered to myself. My hand tightened on the grip of my Sig Sauer. I moved through the hallway, utilizing the slice the pie technique I drilled 1,000 times in urban combat training. Keep tight to the wall. Minimize exposure. Clear the fatal funnel. I headed for the study, Grandpa's sanctuary. It was the room where he managed the timber contracts, where he kept the books, and where he kept the safe. If Linda and Tyler were going to Vegas, they needed cash. And if they needed cash, this was the first place they would hit. I pushed the heavy oak door open with the toe of my boot, leading with the barrel of my gun. A blast of freezing air hit me instantly. I swept the room with my tactical light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes and snowflakes drifting in from outside. The window behind the mahogany desk was shattered. I approached it cautiously, crunching over glass shards. I shone the light on the floor. The glass was scattered across the Persian rug, extending 5 feet into the room. Physics doesn't lie. If the storm had blown the window in, the debris pattern would be erratic. If the pressure from inside had blown it out, the glass would be in the yard. But this was a concentrated impact point. Someone had smashed it from the outside, reached in, and unlocked the latch. But that was just the brute force entry. I checked the heavy deadbolt on the side door leading to the porch. I ran my finger over the keyhole. It was stripped. Raw metal gleamed in the flashlight beam. There were spiral shavings on the floor. Cobalt drill bit. Linda didn't know how to use a power drill. Tyler couldn't change a tire without calling AEAA. Whoever did this knew exactly where the tumblers were. They didn't kick the door in. They surgically removed the lock to maintain silence. My stomach tightened. This was professional. I turned the beam toward the corner of the room, behind the large elk painting that usually hid the wall safe. The painting was on the floor, the canvas ripped. The heavy steel door of the safe stood wide open, gaping like a toothless mouth. I walked over and crouched down. It was empty. The stack of cash Grandpa always kept for emergencies, usually about $5,000 in small bills, was gone. The leather binder containing the deed to the ranch, gone. The titles to the trucks and the tractors, gone. But my eyes fixed on a small empty space on the top shelf. A rectangular space in the dust. My breath hitched. "No," I whispered. "You didn't." I frantically swept the light around the floor. Maybe they dropped it. Maybe they didn't know what it was. Then I saw it. The purple velvet box tossed into the corner near the wastebasket. I picked it up. It felt light. Too light. I opened the lid. The silk lining was torn. The metal was gone. My father's purple heart. The medal he earned in Fallujah. The piece of metal they gave us after he took shrapnel in his chest protecting his squad. It wasn't currency. It wasn't gold bullion. It was his blood. It was the only thing I had left of him that felt holy. Linda had taken it. She had probably pawned it at a shop in Missoula for $50 to buy a tank of gas or a pack of cigarettes. I gripped the empty velvet box until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just theft, it was desecration. They had sold my father's honor for pocket change. I stood up, the rage simmering down into a cold, hard knot in my chest. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I moved to the wastebasket. Linda was sloppy. Narcissists always are. They think they're too smart to get caught. I pulled out a crumpled ball of paper. I smoothed it out on the desk. It was a draft of a quitclaim deed, a document transferring property ownership. Grantor, Arthur Ellison. Grantee, Linda Ellison. At the bottom of the page, the signature line was a mess of ink. Arthur Ellison, A. Ellison. The handwriting was shaky, jagged. It looked nothing like Grandpa's elegant, old-school cursive. It looked like the handwriting of a 28-year-old man with the tremors, trying desperately to copy a signature he'd seen on checks. Tyler. He had been practicing, sitting right here in Grandpa's chair, drinking his whiskey, trying to forge the signature to sell the land out from under a dying man. "You stupid, greedy son of a bitch," I muttered. They hadn't just gone to Vegas. They were planning to come back to a house they owned, with a dead body to bury, and a forged deed to file at the county clerk's office. I pocketed the paper. Evidence. But I still needed to know who was breathing on that phone line. Tyler didn't have the guts to stalk me. Linda was too busy spending money. I walked to the shattered window and looked out. The snow had stopped falling heavily, leaving a fresh, white canvas on the porch. I climbed carefully through the broken window, stepping out onto the wraparound deck. The cold bit through my thermal shirt, but I didn't feel it. I clicked my flashlight off. I didn't want to be a beacon. I used the ambient moonlight reflecting off the snow. I scanned the floorboards. The wind had swept most of the snow away near the railing, but something caught a glint of moonlight. A small cylinder, half buried in a drift near the stairs. I knelt down, pulling a handkerchief from my pocket. I didn't want to contaminate it with my prints. I picked it up. It was cold and heavy. A brass shell casing. I brought it close to my eyes. 9mm Luger. I stared at it, my mind racing through the ballistics. This is Montana. In the Bitterroot Valley, every household has guns. We have .308s for elk. We have 30.06 for deer. We have 12-gauge shotguns for home defense and bears. Hunters don't use 9mm. A 9mm is a pistol round. It has no stopping power against a grizzly. It has no range for hunting game. It's a city caliber. It's a tactical round. It's used by police, military, and organized crime. Grandpa didn't own a 9mm. He was an old revolver man, a 357 Magnum. This casing didn't come from inside the house. It was ejected from a semi-automatic pistol standing right here on the porch. Someone had stood here, racked the slide of a handgun, and ejected a live round, or maybe fired a test shot, before breaking in. Or maybe they were just sending a message. This wasn't just Linda and Tyler being greedy. They were incompetent. They couldn't drill a lock like that. They didn't carry 9mm semi-automatics. They had brought someone else into this. I stood up, looking out into the dark tree line of the forest. The towering pines stood like silent sentinels. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, someone was watching. Linda had sold the furniture. She had sold the car. She had sold my father's metal. And now, it looked like she had sold us out to the wolves. I squeezed the brass casing in my hand. Mistake, I whispered to the darkness. You brought a street gun to a mountain fight. I turned back to the house. I needed backup, and I knew exactly who to call. 20 minutes later, the darkness outside the cabin was slashed by the blinding white beams of halogen headlights. I didn't lower my weapon. Not yet. I watched through the crack in the curtains as a heavy-duty Ford F-150 with a sheriff's department decal on the door crunched up the driveway. The tires were wrapped in heavy snow chains, clanking rhythmically against the frozen earth. Only when I saw the tall, broad-shouldered figure step out, adjusting his Stetson hat against the wind, did I flick the safety back on my SIG. Carter Miles, Deputy Sheriff. He was built like a grizzly bear that had learned to walk on two legs. 6'4", bearded, and usually wearing an expression that could curdle milk. But tonight, as I opened the door, his face was pale. Behind him was Doc Harrigan, a retired combat medic who ran the local urgent care clinic. He was carrying a trauma bag and looked grim. Alicia, Miles said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement between soldiers. I'm here. Watch is over. He's by the fire, I said, stepping aside. They brought the cold in with them, along with the smell of diesel, pine needles, and something else. The rich, savory scent of beef stew. Miles was carrying a large steel thermos. My wife packed it, Miles muttered, noticing me looking at the thermos. She said nobody thinks to eat when the world is ending. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. The simple kindness of a hot meal felt more overwhelming than the violence of the last few hours. Doc Harrigan went straight to Grandpa. No pleasantries. He knelt down, his hands moving with the efficient, unsentimental speed of a man who had patched up Marines in Fallujah. He checked Grandpa's vitals, listened to his chest, and started an IV line with practiced ease. He's tough as old leather, Doc muttered, taping the line to Grandpa's thin arm. Fluid replacement, warming blanket. He'll make it, Alicia. But his heart, it's straining. He needs his meds. I know, I said, my voice tight. They took them. Miles, who had been standing back to give the doc room, finally stepped forward. He took off his hat, holding it against his chest with both hands. It was a gesture of respect I hadn't seen in years. He looked down at the man lying on the rug. Arthur Ellison wasn't just an old man to the people of this valley. He was a pillar. He had built the community center. He had loaned money to farmers during the drought without asking for interest. He had taught half the boys in the county how to hunt, fish, and be men. Miles stared at Grandpa's sunken cheeks, the bruises on his arms from the cold, and the humiliating pile of dirty clothes I had cut off him in the corner. The big deputy's shoulders started to shake. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the hard floor. He reached out and took Grandpa's limp, cold hand in his massive, calloused paw. "Mr. Arthur," Miles whispered. His voice cracked. I watched, stunned. Carter Miles was the kind of man who would wrestle a steer and not break a sweat. He was the law in this valley. And he was crying. Big, heavy tears rolled down his bearded cheeks, disappearing into his collar. "He taught me to shoot," Miles said, not looking at me. He was talking to the floor, or maybe to God. I was 12. My dad was a drunk. Arthur found me sitting on a stump out by the creek, trying to load a .22 rifle. He didn't yell. He didn't call the cops. He sat down next to me and showed me how to hold it. He said, "A weapon is a responsibility, son. Just like a life." Miles squeezed Grandpa's hand gently. "He gave me my first job at the mill when nobody else would hire me. He saved my life, Alicia. And I let this happen. I let those vultures pick him clean." "You didn't know, Carter," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. The fabric of his uniform was cold, but his grief was burning hot. "I should have known," he hissed, wiping his eyes aggressively with the back of his hand. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a dark, dangerous anger. "Where are they?" "Vegas, or so the note says." "And the break-in?" Miles stood up, putting his hat back on. The deputy sheriff was back. "You said on the phone you found something." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief containing the brass casing. I held it out to him. Miles shone his flashlight on it. His eyes narrowed instantly. 9mm, he grunted. "Parabellum." "Not a hunter," I said. "No, definitely not." Miles looked at me, his expression grim. "This confirms the rumors. We've had BOLO alerts from the feds about a new player moving into the valley. Jonas Creed." The name hung in the air like smoke. "Real estate developer?" I asked. "Frontman," Miles corrected. "He's buying up land along the northern ridge, discontiguous parcels. But if you connect the dots on a map, they form a straight line through the forest." "A route," I realized. "Smuggling." Miles nodded. "Drugs coming down from Canada, guns going up. The terrain is too rough for Border Patrol to monitor effectively. But they need a staging ground, a hub. They need a place with big barns, secluded roads, and access to the old logging trails." I looked around the room. "They need the Ellison Ranch." "Exactly," Miles said. "Linda and Tyler are just pawns. Useful idiots. They probably owe Creed money, or he promised them a payout that would make Vegas look like a petty cash drawer." "But Creed, he's dangerous, Alicia. He's not a local boy gone bad. He's cartel-affiliated." "That explains the 9mm, I said, "and the drill on the lock." "I'm calling it in," Miles said, reaching for his radio. "We need to get a perimeter set up, state police, maybe even the FBI." "Wait," I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a ring. It was a single, sharp vibration. A text message. I pulled it out. Unknown number. I opened the message. The screen glowed bright in the dim room. "You want the old man's heart meds? I have them. Come to the old sawmill. Alone. If I see a cop car or even hear a siren, I pour the pills into the snow. He dies tonight, Beatich." My blood went cold. I looked at Grandpa. Doc Harrigan was adjusting the IV, looking worried. "His heart rate is climbing again, Alicia. He needs that digoxin. The IV helps, but it's not a fix. He wouldn't survive the night without those pills." And the nearest pharmacy was 40 miles away, closed due to the storm. I looked at Miles. He was thumbing the transmit button on his radio. "Carter, stop," I said sharp and low. "What?" I showed him the screen. He read it, his face twisting in fury. "It's a trap, Alicia. You know it's a trap. The old sawmill, that's 5 miles deep in the woods. It's a kill box." "I know," I said, holstering my phone. "But he has the medicine." "We can get more medicine," Miles argued. I can radio a medivac. In this weather? I pointed to the window where the snow was slamming against the glass. No chopper is flying tonight, and by the time an ambulance gets here from Missoula with the script, he'll be gone. I walked over to the table and picked up my Sig Sauer. I checked the magazine one last time. Full, plus one in the chamber. I have to go, I said. I'm going with you. Miles stepped forward, his hand on his holster. Read the text, Carter. I stared him down. If he sees a cop, he dumps the pills. Grandpa dies. I can't take that risk. You're walking into an ambush, Miles growled. You're good, Willis. I know you're good. But you're one woman against God knows how many shooters. I pulled on my heavy parka and zipped it up to my chin. I looked at the old man sleeping on the floor, the man who had raised me when the world didn't want me. I'm not just a woman, Carter, I said, my voice devoid of fear, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I'm a United States soldier. And they just made the mistake of threatening my family on my home turf. I opened the door. The wind howled, inviting me out into the dark. Keep him alive, Doc, I said without looking back. I'll be back with the medicine, or I'll be back with their heads. I moved through the tree line like a ghost. Back at the cabin, I had taken a white bedsheet and cut a hole for my head, draping it over my parka. It was a crude form of winter camouflage, what we used to call hilly-billy snow camo in training exercises. But in a blizzard at night, it rendered me invisible. The old sawmill loomed ahead, a skeletal beast of rusted iron and rotting wood against the gray sky. It had been abandoned since the logging crash in the 90s, a place where teenagers went to drink and vandals went to break things. But tonight, it was alive. Yellow light spilled from the dirty windows of the foreman's office on the second floor. Smoke curled from the chimney. I crouched behind a snow-covered stump, scanning the perimeter. 2 vehicles were parked near the loading dock. One was a black Cadillac Escalade, tinted windows, mud-terrain tires, expensive. That belonged to Jonas Creed. The other was the red Mustang, Tyler's pride and joy. The car my mother's college fund had paid for. Seeing it sitting there, shiny and arrogant amidst the industrial decay, made my jaw tighten. I moved forward, keeping low. The wind was blowing into my face, which was good. It carried my scent away from them and carried their noise toward me. I reached the side of the building. The metal siding groaned in the wind. I found the old maintenance ladder that led up to the catwalk surrounding the office. The rungs were coated in ice. I holstered my cig and began to climb. 1 hand, 1 foot. Slow. Deliberate. If I slipped, the clang of my body hitting the metal deck would announce my arrival better than a doorbell. I reached the top and flattened myself against the wall. I crept toward the window, the light slicing through the darkness. The glass was caked with years of grime, but someone had wiped a clear circle in the center. I peered in. The sight that greeted me made my blood boil so hot I was surprised it didn't melt the snow on my shoulders. It was a party. Inside, they had set up a portable generator powering a string of lights and an electric heater. Linda was sitting in a leather office chair that looked like it had been dragged out of Jonas's SUV. She was wearing her fur coat, the mink one she claimed was an heirloom, but I knew she bought it on credit. In her hand was a crystal flute, not a plastic cup. A crystal flute filled with golden, bubbling liquid, Moet and Chandon. The bottle was sitting on the desk. My grandfather was back at the cabin, lying on a cold floor, his stomach empty except for cat food, his body fighting for every beat of his heart. And here was his daughter-in-law, sipping $50 champagne and laughing. And Tyler. My stepbrother was pacing the room with a jittery, frantic energy. He was leaning over a glass coffee table. He held a rolled-up $100 bill in his nose. He snorted a long, thick line of white powder. He threw his head back and whooped, rubbing his gums. "Woo, that's the good stuff, baby," Tyler yelled, his voice muffled by the glass, but still audible. "To the victor go the spoils." Linda laughed, a harsh, cackling sound. She reached for a stack of cash sitting on the desk. Thick bands of hundreds. Benjamins. "Count it again, Ty," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "Make sure Creed to insure us on the down payment." "It's all there, Ma," Tyler grinned, his eyes wide and dilated. 50 grand, just for the signature. When the deed clears next week, we get the other 150. I felt physically ill. That money wasn't just paper. It was the timber rights. It was the land my great-grandfather had homesteaded. It was the soil my father was buried in. What about the old man? Tyler asked, wiping his nose. You sure he's, you know? Linda waved her hand dismissively, the diamond on her finger flashing. Please, I turned off the furnace before we left. I dumped his pills. He's 86, Tyler. He has a bad heart. By the time we get back tomorrow morning with the groceries, he'll be a popsicle. She took another sip, savoring it. I've got it all planned out, she continued, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. I'll scream. I'll cry. I'll call 911. We'll play the grieving family. I'll buy the most expensive mahogany casket in Missoula. I'll wear that black veil I bought in Italy. The whole town will say, oh, poor Linda, she took such good care of him. And Alicia? Tyler asked, a shadow crossing his face. What about her? Linda sneered. She's wandering around in a blizzard looking for a pharmacy that doesn't exist. Maybe she'll freeze to death too. If not, who's going to believe a PTSD-ridden soldier over a grieving widow? We have the paperwork. We have the power of attorney. She has nothing. My hand moved to my holster. I drew the Sig Sauer. I brought it up, pressing the muzzle against the cold glass. Through the scope of my own eye, I lined up the iron sights. Front sight, rear sight, target. I had a clear shot at Tyler's head. One trigger pull. The glass would shatter. The hollow point round would end his misery and his greed in a fraction of a second. Then shift fire. 2 to Linda's chest. It would be so easy. It would be justice. The Old Testament kind. An eye for an eye, a life for a life. My finger rested on the trigger. I applied pressure, taking up the slack. Just a few more pounds of force. Don't do it, Sergeant. The voice in my head wasn't mine. It was Miles's. A weapon is a responsibility. If I killed them now, I was just a murderer. I was the unstable vet they claimed I was. They would die quick, painless deaths. They didn't deserve that. They didn't deserve the mercy of a bullet. They deserved to rot. They deserved to be stripped of everything, their freedom, their reputation, their stolen money. They deserved to spend the next 20 years in a 6x8 concrete cell thinking about this moment. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath fog the air. I lowered the gun. Instead, I reached into my parka and pulled out my smartphone. I stayed in the shadows, angling the camera through the cleanest part of the glass. I hit record. I zoomed in. I caught Linda holding the champagne toast. To Arthur Ellison, she mocked, raising the glass. May he rest in peace, eventually. I caught Tyler snorting another line. To the new owners of the Ellison Ranch. I caught the stacks of cash, the illegal drugs, the conspiracy to commit murder. I recorded for 2 solid minutes, every word, every laugh, every damning admission. I've got you, I whispered. I own you now. I stopped the recording and saved it to the cloud instantly. The signal was weak, but it went through. But this wasn't enough. A video proves intent, but it doesn't stop the sale. Linda mentioned paperwork. She mentioned the deed. I scanned the room again. On the far side of the desk, near Jonas's briefcase, was a thick manila envelope. It was stamped with the Department of Veterans Affairs seal and a legal notary stamp. That didn't look like a property deed. That looked like government correspondence. Wait, Linda said. Who's going to believe a soldier? We have the paperwork. My eyes narrowed. What paperwork? I looked at Tyler. He was heading toward the bathroom door at the back of the office. I gotta take a leak, he announced, swaying slightly. This was my chance. They were distracted. Jonas wasn't in the room, probably downstairs checking the perimeter or the shipment. I didn't just need the video. I needed to know what was in that envelope. If they were forging Grandpa's signature, that was state crime. But if that was a VA envelope, that was federal. I pocketed my phone. I checked my knife. I wasn't going to shoot them. Not yet. I was going in. The moment Jonas Creed stepped out onto the rusted metal balcony to take his call, closing the heavy glass door behind him, the office became a vacuum of silence. Linda had gone downstairs moments ago, probably to fetch more ice for her champagne or to gloat over the phone to a friend in Vegas. That left Tyler. I heard the distinct sound of a bathroom door latching from the corner of the room, followed by the hum of an exhaust fan. Now. I holstered my weapon, I needed both hands, and slid my fingers under the sash of the window. The lock was old and rotted. I applied steady upward pressure. The wood groaned, a low protest against the ice sealing it shut, but it gave way. I slid it up just enough to squeeze through. A blast of warm air hit my face, smelling of expensive cigar smoke, stale sweat, and the cloying sweetness of spilled alcohol. It was the smell of corruption. I dropped onto the floor. My boots made a soft thud on the hardwood, masked by the rattling of the storm outside. I didn't waste a second. I moved straight to the massive oak desk in the center of the room. It was cluttered with the remnants of their celebration. Half-empty glasses, lines of white powder on a mirror, and stacks of cash. But I ignored the money. Money comes and goes. I needed the paper that would put them away forever. My eyes locked onto the thick manila envelope I had seen from the window. It was sitting right next to Jonas's leather briefcase. I reached for it with a gloved hand. The paper felt heavy, substantial. In the upper left corner was a seal I knew better than my own face. The eagle, the flags, the gold embossing. Department of Veterans Affairs, official business, penalty for private use, $300. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of warning. Why would Jonas Creed have VA correspondence? I flipped the envelope over. It had been opened. I reached in and pulled out the document inside. It was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, bordered in black. I read the header, and the world stopped spinning. Certificate of death. Name of deceased. Alicia Marie Willis. Rank, E5, Sergeant Social Security Number, XXX, GX, 4921. Date of death, October 14, 2023. Place of death, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Cause of death, traumatic injury, IED blast. I stared at the words, my breath trapped in my lungs. I read it again, and again. I wasn't looking at a forgery. I was looking at my own obituary. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just Linda being greedy. This wasn't just Tyler being a thief. This was erasure. They hadn't just ignored my existence. They had actively orchestrated my death. I scanned the bottom of the document. There were signatures, a corrupt medical examiner, a bribed notary. And there, listed as the informant and next of kin, Linda Ellison. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. Grandpa's will left everything to me. But if I was dead, legally, officially dead, then the inheritance laws of Montana would kick in. The estate wouldn't go to a dead soldier. It would bypass me entirely. It would go to the closest living relative of Arthur Ellison. Since he had no other children, and if he died intestate, without a valid heir, the state would look for a spouse, Linda. They were going to kill Grandpa tonight by withholding his medication. And tomorrow, when the lawyers looked for the heir, they would find a death certificate for Alicia Willis filed months ago. Linda would get the ranch, the timber, the land. And I would be nothing more than a ghost, a clerical error that nobody would bother to investigate until the bulldozers were already tearing down the cabin. A cold fury, darker and deeper than anything I had ever felt in combat, washed over me. This was a federal crime, wire fraud, identity theft, stolen valor. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was an act of war. I want you to pause for a second. Imagine holding a piece of paper that says you are dead, signed by the woman who raised you, just so she could steal your home. If this makes your blood boil like it does mine, hit that like button right now. Comment. Justice below. If you think Linda and Tyler deserve to rot in a federal prison for the rest of their miserable lives, I need to know you're with me on this. I folded the document and shoved it deep into the inside pocket of my parka, right next to my heart. Evidence. This was the nail in their coffin. I turned to leave. I had the video. I had the paper. I needed to get out, get to Miles, and bring the hammer of God down on this place. Whoosh! The sound of a toilet flushing roared from the corner of the room. I froze. The bathroom door handle turned. There was nowhere to hide. The desk was open-backed. The curtains were sheer. If I moved to the window, he would see the motion. I pressed myself flat against the wall, into the deep shadow of a tall filing cabinet, praying the darkness would hold. Tyler stepped out. He was zipping up his jeans, humming a jagged, off-key tune. He looked disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy from the drugs. He walked toward the desk, likely to do another line of coke before Jonas came back inside. He walked right past me. He didn't see me. His focus was entirely on the mirror and the white powder on the table. I held my breath. Just take the drugs, Tyler. Take the drugs and look away. He reached for the rolled-up bill. But then he paused. He frowned. He looked down at the floor, right next to the expensive Persian rug. The hardwood floor was polished to a shine. But there, cutting across the pristine surface, was a trail. Black, muddy, wet footprints. My boots. I had walked in from the storm. The snow caught in the treads of my combat boots had melted in the warmth of the office, leaving a perfect, damning trail of evidence leading from the window, right to the filing cabinet. Tyler stared at the wet prints. His drugged brain churned slowly, processing the visual data. Water, snow, footprints. He turned his head slowly, following the trail. His eyes moved across the floor, up the wall, and locked directly onto mine. For a second, there was no sound but the wind rattling the window I had left unlatched. Tyler's jaw dropped. His eyes bulged. The arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer, primal terror as he recognized the figure standing in the shadows. He saw the snow camo drape. He saw the cold, dead eyes of his stepsister. And he saw the Sig Sauer P3 20 in my hand. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He opened his mouth and screamed, "Jonas! She's here! Help!" The scream tore through the building, piercing the walls, echoing out to the balcony. I cursed. The element of surprise was gone. The glass door to the balcony shattered inward as Jonas kicked it open, a submachine gun in his hands. The hunt was on. The glass door to the balcony didn't just open, it exploded inward, showered the office with glittering shards. Jonas Creed stood in the frame, silhouetted against the storm, the muzzle of a submachine gun spitting fire. Pop, 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 pop. Bullets chewed up the oak desk, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I let gravity and training take over. I vaulted over the windowsill, launching myself into the freezing void. It was a 15-foot drop, but the snowdrift below was nearly 4 feet deep. I hit the powder hard, rolling instantly to disperse the impact. The cold rushed into my nose and mouth, sharp as broken glass, but I was already moving before I even stood up. "Get her!" Jonas roared from above. "She has the files!" I scrambled to my feet, the bedsheet camouflage billowing around me like a ghost's shroud. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the tree line, my boots churning through the heavy drifts. Behind me, the heavy thud, thud, thud of boots on the metal staircase told me the hunt was on. I hit the cover of the dense pine forest just as a erratic burst of gunfire clipped the bark of a tree next to my head. Pine needles rained down on me. I dove behind a massive ponderosa pine, pressing my back against the rough bark. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I checked my SIG, still functional. I closed my eyes for a split second, regulating my breathing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The panic that had gripped Tyler back in the office, I didn't have that luxury. I remembered the words of General George S. Patton, something my drill sergeant used to scream until our ears rang. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his. I wasn't going to die tonight. Not in the snow. Not by the hands of a drug-addled thief and a smuggler in a suit. I opened my eyes. The forest was pitch black to them, but to me, it was cover. It was a weapon. "I can't see her," Tyler's voice echoed through the trees, shrill and panicked. "Fan out, you idiot," Jonas shouted. Use your light! Beams of tactical flashlights cut through the falling snow, swinging wildly. They were breaking the first rule of night combat: light discipline. In the dark, a flashlight doesn't help you see. It tells the enemy exactly where to shoot. They were painting bullseyes on their own chests. I moved deeper into the shadows, circling back. I wasn't running away anymore. I was flanking. I watched them from behind a cluster of scrub oak. Tyler was stumbling through the snow, waving a pistol around like he was in a gangster movie. Jonas was further back, moving slower, his expensive shoes slipping on the ice. Tyler was terrified. I could hear his hyperventilating from 20 yards away. The cocaine had turned his paranoia up to 11. I reached down and scooped up a handful of dense, wet snow. I packed it tight into a hard ball. I looked at a thicket of bushes to Tyler's right, about 10 yards away from where I actually was. I threw the snowball with a pitcher's arm. Thwack! It hit the dry brush with a sound like a footstep. Tyler spun around, eyes wide, pupils blown. There! He screamed. He didn't aim. He just pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 He fired 3 rounds wildly into the dark. Crash! The sound of shattering glass echoed from the loading dock behind them. You moron! Jonas shrieked. Tyler had missed the bushes entirely. His stray rounds had flown past the trees and plowed straight into the windshield of Jonas's black Cadillac Escalade. That's my truck! Jonas roared, lowering his weapon to stare at his ruined vehicle. I saw her! I saw her! Tyler gibbered, swinging the gun back and forth. You shot my windshield, you junkie! While they were screaming at each other, distracted by their own incompetence, I made my move. I stepped out from behind the tree, leveling my Sig Sauer. I was 30 yards away. An easy shot. I could have dropped Tyler right then. A center mass shot would have ended him. But a dead Tyler was just a body. A living Tyler, terrified and facing 20 years in Leavenworth, was justice. Besides, I needed to make sure they couldn't follow me. I needed to isolate them here, 5 miles from civilization, in a blizzard. I took a breath. Front sight focus. I aimed at the front tire of the Escalade. P-A-Z-U-D-U. The tire exploded with a satisfying hiss, the heavy SUV listing to the left. Jonas and Tyler hit the dirt, scrambling for cover. Sniper! Tyler wailed, burying his face in the snow. I shifted my aim, the red Mustang, the symbol of everything Tyler had stolen from me. Pow-W. The front passenger tire blew out, but I wasn't done. I wanted them to know exactly how helpless they were. I aimed for the rear of the Escalade, just above the wheel well. Clang. The bullet punched through the metal. Immediately, the pungent chemical smell of gasoline began to waft through the crisp winter air. Gas, Jonas yelled, realizing what I had done. Don't shoot, you'll spark it. He was right. If they fired a muzzle flash near that leak, the fumes could turn that SUV into a bomb. I had just disarmed them without taking their guns. They were pinned down behind a leaking car, miles from home, with no way to pursue me. Silence fell over the clearing. The only sound was the wind and the drip, drip, drip of high-octane fuel hitting the snow. I retreated slowly, walking backward until the darkness swallowed me completely. I reached the edge of the access road where I had parked my truck a mile back. But before I left, I had one last message to deliver. I stopped at a large pine tree that stood right at the edge of the clearing, the first thing they would see when they finally gathered the courage to stand up. I pulled my combat knife from my belt. It was a K-bar, the blade scarred from use. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the notepad I had taken from the office desk earlier. I scrawled 3 words on it with a marker. I slammed the knife into the bark of the pine tree, pinning the note at eye level. The blade sank deep with a dull thunk. I took one last look at the cowering figures of the men who had tried to erase me. Enjoy the walk, I whispered. I turned and vanished into the storm. When they finally dared to shine their lights on that tree, they would see the note fluttering in the wind. See you in hell. The storm broke just before dawn. The sun rose over the Bitterroot Mountains, turning the world into a blinding expanse of white diamonds. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was the perfect day for a funeral or a resurrection. I sat in Grandpa's favorite leather armchair, facing the front door. On the small side table next to me, a mug of black coffee steamed in the morning light. Next to it lay my Sig Sauer, unloaded and locked back, just a paperweight for now. In my hand, I held the cracked iPhone I'd recovered from the snow last night, Jonas Creed's phone. I looked at the screen. 7:15 a.m. I opened the messaging app and found Linda's number. My thumbs moved quickly. Job done. Old man is gone. Alicia ran off. Come sign the papers. Bring the notary. I hit send. Then I sat back and waited. Beside me, in the shadows of the hallway leading to the kitchen, Deputy Carter Miles stood like a statue carved from granite. He wasn't alone. 4 men in tactical gear, wearing jackets emblazoned with FBI in bold yellow letters, were crouched in the kitchen and the mudroom. You sure they'll come? Miles whispered, adjusting the earpiece in his ear. Greed makes people stupid, Carter, I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. They walked 5 miles in the snow last night after I crippled their cars. They're cold, they're angry, and they're desperate to get paid. They'll be here. 30 minutes later, the sound of a heavy engine roared up the driveway. It wasn't the Cadillac or the Mustang. Those were still rotting in the woods. It was a beat-up taxi van from town. Car doors slammed. Voices raised in argument. The front door handle turned. It was locked. Open the damn door! Linda's voice screeched from outside. I didn't move. The door was kicked hard. Once. Twice. The wood splintered around the lock, the same lock they had drilled out the night before, and the door swung open. Linda Ellison marched in first. She looked like a train wreck. Her mink coat was matted with wet snow. Her makeup was smeared across her face like war paint, and her lips were blue from the cold. Behind her limped Jonas Creed, clutching his arm where he must have fallen during the trek, his expensive suit ruined. And trailing in the rear was Tyler, shivering violently, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. They stopped dead when they saw me. I didn't stand up. I just lifted my coffee mug in a mock toast. Morning, sunshine, I said. Rough night? Linda's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You little bitch! You're supposed to be running. And you're supposed to be in Vegas, I countered calmly. Jonas stepped forward, his face dark with menace. Where is the old man? My phone said he was dead. Technically, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the crumpled document I had stolen from his office. I'm the one who's dead. Isn't that right, Linda? I tossed the certificate of death onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft slap. Linda flinched as if I had thrown a grenade. Her eyes locked onto the paper. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and corpse-like. I found this in your boyfriend's office, I said, my voice hardening. Fraudulent filing with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Faking the death of a service member to bypass inheritance laws. That's not just a felony, Linda. That's treason against the family. You don't understand, Linda stammered, looking at Jonas for support. It was just a contingency. And this? I picked up my own phone and tapped the screen. My voice filled the room, amplified by the Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf. I'll scream. I'll cry. I'll call 911. I'll buy the most expensive mahogany casket. By the time we get back, he'll be a popsicle. The recording echoed off the log walls. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler started to hyperventilate. She recorded us. Ma, she recorded us. Shut up, Jonas roared, reaching into his jacket. Give me that phone. I wouldn't do that, I said, my eyes flicking to the hallway. Who's going to stop me? Jonas sneered, pulling out a snub-nosed revolver. You're alone, Willis. You and a dead old man. He's not dead, a gravelly voice said from the bedroom door. Jonas froze. Linda gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Grandpa Arthur stood in the doorway. He was leaning heavily on Doc Harrigan, pale and weak, but he was standing. He was alive. And he was looking at his daughter-in-law with a look of disappointment that cut deeper than any knife. I heard you, Linda, Grandpa said, his voice shaking with emotion. I heard you laughing about the casket. Arthur, no. Linda stepped forward, her hands trembling. It's a misunderstanding. I was drunk. That's enough, I said, setting my coffee cup down with a sharp clack. Endgame. I looked at Jonas. Drop the gun, Creed. Or what? Jonas raised the weapon, aiming it at my chest. I'll kill you all and burn this place to the ground. Who's gonna know? Federal agents, drop the weapon! The command roared from the kitchen like a thunderclap. 4 FBI agents poured into the living room, their AR-15 rifles raised and locked on targets. Miles stepped out from the hallway, his service weapon leveled at Jonas's head. Police, get on the ground, now! The room erupted into chaos. Tyler screamed and threw himself onto the floor, curling into a ball. Don't shoot, I didn't do it, it was her. Jonas panicked. He swung his gun toward Miles. Crack! A single shot rang out. It wasn't Miles. It was the FBI sharpshooter near the fridge. The bullet struck Jonas in the right shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, dropping the revolver as blood sprayed onto the white rug. He collapsed, clutching his shoulder, writhing in pain. Secure him, Miles barked. 2 agents were on Jonas instantly, zip-tying his hands behind his back. Another agent grabbed Tyler, hauling him up by his collar as he sobbed uncontrollably. But I only had eyes for Linda. She stood frozen in the center of the room, surrounded by the ruin of her schemes. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was a pathetic, small woman who had gambled everything and lost. Miles walked over to her, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Linda Ellison, Miles said, his voice cold and official. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud against the Veterans Administration, forgery, and elder abuse. He spun her around and snapped the cuffs on her wrists. Click, click. The sound seemed to wake her from her trance. She realized it was real. The money was gone. The freedom was gone. She looked at the agents. She looked at Jonas bleeding on the floor. And then, her desperate eyes found me. She dropped to her knees. It was the most pathetic thing I'd ever seen. The woman who had treated me like a servant, who had mocked my service, who had tried to erase my existence, was now kneeling on my floor. Before you hear what she said, I want you to hit that like button if you believe that justice was served today. Leave a comment saying guilty if you think betraying your family is the unforgivable sin. Tears, black with mascara, streamed down her face. She crawled forward on her knees, trying to reach for my boots with her cuffed hands. Alicia, baby, please, she wailed, her voice cracking. Tell them I was forced. It was Jonas. He threatened me. He said he'd kill Tyler. I looked down at her, my face impassive. He threatened you? I asked softly. Yes. She nodded frantically. I didn't want to hurt Arthur. I love this family. I love you, Alicia. You're my daughter. The room went silent. Even the FBI agents paused to look at the display of sheer, shameless desperation. You love me, I repeated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the death certificate one last time. I held it up so she could see her own signature on the bottom line. Is that why you signed my death warrant, Mom? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a strangled sob of defeat. Get her out of my sight, I said to Miles. As they dragged her out the broken door, screaming and kicking, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 10 years. The storm was over. The snow in the front yard was pristine white, sparkling under the morning sun like crushed diamonds. But the scene playing out on top of it was ugly, loud, and filthy. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the finale of a 10-year nightmare. The FBI agents were frog-marching Linda and Tyler toward the waiting black SUVs and the sheriff's cruiser. Jonas was already in the back of an ambulance, cuffed to the gurney, surrounded by armed guards. But Linda and Tyler weren't going quietly. As the reality of the situation sank in, the cold steel of the handcuffs, the grim faces of the federal agents, the utter collapse of their Vegas dream, the facade of their family bond disintegrated. It didn't just crack, it exploded. Get your hands off me, Linda shrieked, twisting her body violently as an agent pushed her toward the car. She looked wild, her hair matted, her expensive coat dragging in the slush. She spun her head around, eyes bulging, desperate to find a scapegoat. Her gaze landed on Tyler, who was being shoved into the adjacent vehicle, weeping like a child. "It's him! It's all him!" Linda screamed, her voice shredding the crisp mountain air. "He's a junkie! He forced me to do it! He needed money for his dealer! I was scared for my life!" Tyler stopped crying instantly. The accusation hit him like a physical slap. He whipped his head around, his face contorted with a mixture of shock and venomous rage. "You lying old hag!" Tyler roared back, spitting on the ground. "You planned the whole thing. You wanted that condo at the Palms. You've been talking about killing the old man since Christmas." "He's lying!" Linda yelled, looking frantically at Miles. "Officer, look at him. He's high right now. You can't believe a word he says. I'm a victim here." "A victim?" Tyler laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "You're a predator, Ma. You sold Dad's watch last year. You sold Alicia's medal. You're the greedy one. I just wanted a cut." "Shut up. Shut up, you ungrateful little parasite." Linda lunged at him, trying to scratch his face with her cuffed hands, but the agent held her back easily. I watched them tear each other apart. It was disgusting. It was pathetic. But it was also deeply satisfying. For years, they had been a united front against me. The real family. The insiders. They had gaslit me, marginalized me, and made me feel like the intruder in my own home. Now, at the first sign of pressure, they were throwing each other under the bus without a second thought. "Hold on a second, Carter," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the screaming match like a knife. Miles signaled the agents to pause. They held Linda by the door of the cruiser. She was panting, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. When she saw me walking down the stairs, her expression shifted instantly. The feral anger vanished, replaced by a grotesque, desperate hope. She switched tactics in a heartbeat. The manipulator put her mask back on, even though it was cracked and broken. "Alicia," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Alicia? Thank God. Tell them, honey. Tell them I took care of Arthur. Tell them I'm a good mother. Please. I can't go to jail. I'm too old. I'm your family." I stopped inches from her face. I could smell her, stale champagne, expensive perfume, and the sour, acrid scent of fear. I looked into her eyes. I searched for any trace of genuine love, any spark of remorse. There was nothing. Just a black hole of need and selfishness. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I leaned in close, invading her personal space, forcing her to look at me. I lowered my voice to a whisper, intimate and terrifyingly cold. "You listen to me, Linda," I said, enunciating every syllable. "You are not my mother. You never were. You were just a squatter in my father's house." She flinched, her lip quivering. "You talk about family," I continued, my eyes boring into hers. "But family doesn't starve the elderly. Family doesn't steal valor. Family doesn't sign death warrants for their children." She stammered. "I made a mistake." "No," I cut her off. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. What you are is a disease. You are a malignant tumor that has been growing on this ranch for 10 years. And today is surgery day." I pulled back, standing tall, letting the winter sun hit my face. "I'm cutting you out," I said, loud enough for Tyler to hear too. "You don't exist to me anymore. Don't write, don't call. Rot." Linda's face crumbled. The hope died, replaced by the crushing weight of her reality. She slumped against the car, all the fight draining out of her. I nodded to Miles. "Get them out of here." Miles shoved her into the back seat and slammed the door with a finality that echoed off the mountains. He walked over to me, adjusting his belt. The big deputy looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "You okay, Willis?" he asked. "I'm getting there," I said. "What are they looking at?" Miles pulled a notepad from his pocket, consulting his notes. "Well, the feds aren't happy about the VA fraud. That's a heavy charge. Plus the conspiracy to commit murder across state lines since Jonas was moving assets to Nevada. And the drugs." He looked at the cars. Jonas Creed is looking at life without parole. He's got priors and he shot at a federal agent. He's done. And Linda? I asked. For signing that death certificate and the attempted murder of Arthur via neglect? Miles shook his head grimly. The district attorney is going to throw the book at her. Stolen Valor Act, elder abuse, fraud. She's looking at 20 years, minimum. Tyler will probably get 15 if he takes a plea deal and testifies against Jonas. But either way, they aren't coming back to this valley. Not ever. 20 years. By the time Linda got out, she would be 75. She would be destitute, alone, and forgotten. It was a fate worse than the quick death I had considered last night. Good, I said. Let them go. Miles tipped his hat. He walked back to his cruiser and signaled the convoy. Engines roared to life. The lights flashed, red and blue painting the snow in a rhythmic, strobing dance. I watched as the line of vehicles pulled out of the driveway. I watched the back of Linda's head through the wire mesh of the police car window. She wasn't looking back. She was staring at her lap, defeated. The convoy moved slowly down the long, winding road, kicking up a cloud of white dust. I watched them until they were just specks in the distance, until they turned the corner past the old tree line and vanished. The sound of the sirens faded. Then, the sound of the engines faded. And finally, the silence returned. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of last night, the silence of death and secrets. This was different. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, clean air of the Montana morning. I listened. I heard the wind whispering through the pines. I heard a crow calling in the distance. I heard the drip of melting snow from the roof. It was the sound of peace. My shoulders dropped. The tension that had held my body rigid for hours, for years, finally released. I turned around and looked at the house. The front door was broken. The window was shattered. The floor was stained. It was a mess. But it was my mess. It was our house again. The tumor was gone. The healing could finally begin. I walked back up the stairs, stepping over the splintered wood of the doorframe, and went inside to make my grandfather a proper breakfast. 30 days. That's how long it takes to scrub the smell of betrayal out of a house. You don't do it with bleach or ammonia. You do it with sage, with pine needles, and with the slow, steady warmth of a fire that never goes out. It was Christmas morning in the Bitterroot Valley. I stood in the center of the living room, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. The broken window where I had escaped that night was gone, replaced by double-paned glass that framed the snowy mountains like a postcard. The bloodstains on the rug were gone, replaced by a thick, woven wool carpet. But the biggest change wasn't the furniture. It was the air. The house breathed again. From the kitchen, the rich, savory aroma of a 20-pound roast turkey wafted through the hallway, mixing with the sweet scent of caramelized pecans and cinnamon. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of home. Alicia? I turned around. Grandpa Arthur was standing in the doorway of his bedroom. He wasn't lying on the floor in dirty clothes. He was standing upright, leaning on a polished hickory cane. He was wearing a new cable-knit sweater I had bought him in Missoula, and his face, though still thin, had color in it. The gray pallor of death had been replaced by the rosy flush of life. "Merry Christmas, old man," I smiled, walking over to offer him an arm. "Don't old man me," he grumbled playfully, though his eyes were shining. "I can still outshoot you on a good day." He shuffled to his favorite leather armchair, the throne he had almost lost, and sat down with a contented sigh. He looked at the 8-foot Douglas fir tree standing in the corner, adorned with lights and ornaments that had been in our family for 3 generations. "I have something for you," Grandpa said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Grandpa, we agreed no big gifts. Fixing the roof was enough," I said. "Hush," he commanded. He reached into the deep pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a simple red handkerchief. He held it out to me. His hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from Parkinson's, but his grip was firm. I took it. I unfolded the cloth. My breath caught in my throat. It was a pocket watch, solid gold, heavy and cool in my palm. On the front, engraved in elegant script, were the initials, J.W., John Willis, my father. I stammered, running my thumb over the engraving. I thought Linda sold this years ago. I haven't seen it since the funeral. Grandpa chuckled, a dry, raspy sound that sounded like music to my ears. She tried, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly at the mention of her name. She turned this house upside down looking for it. She tore apart his closet. She ransacked the attic. He tapped the floorboards with his cane. I pried up a loose board under my bed 5 years ago, he winked. I wrapped it in oilcloth and shoved it down next to the joists. I knew that woman would sell the fillings out of my teeth if she could. But I swore she would never touch John's watch. I looked at him, tears pricking my eyes. Even when he was weak, even when he was starving and freezing, he had been fighting. He had been protecting the legacy in the only way he could. It keeps good time, he said softly. It just needs winding, like this family. We just needed a little winding. Thank you, I whispered, clutching the watch to my chest. I'll keep it safe. I know you will, he nodded. You're the keeper now, Alicia. You always were. Ding dong. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful, welcoming sound that signaled guests, not intruders. That'll be the cavalry, I said, wiping my eyes. I opened the front door to a blast of cold air and warm laughter. Carter Miles stood there, not in his beige sheriff's uniform, but in a flannel shirt and jeans. Next to him was his wife, Sarah, holding a massive bowl of potato salad, and 2 little girls in puffy pink snowsuits who immediately bolted past me toward the tree. Delivery! Miles grinned, holding up 2 bottles of spiced eggnog. And before you ask, yes, Sarah made the potato salad, so it's actually edible. I heard that, Sarah laughed, stepping inside and giving me a hug that squeezed the breath out of me. Merry Christmas, Alicia. Merry Christmas, Sarah. Come in, it's warm. Within minutes, the silent, tomb-like cabin of last month was transformed. Jazz music played softly from the speakers. The clinking of silverware, the laughter of children, and the deep baritone of Miles and Grandpa talking about hunting filled every corner. I stood by the fireplace, watching them. Miles wasn't my blood. Sarah wasn't my cousin. Those kids weren't my nieces. But as I watched Miles carefully cut the turkey for Grandpa, making sure the pieces were small enough for him to manage, I realized something profound. Linda and Tyler shared my DNA. They shared my last name, and they had left us to die. Miles had kicked down a door to save us. He had cried for my grandfather. He had stood by me when the bullets were flying. Blood makes you relatives. Loyalty makes you family. I walked over to the window, needing a moment to contain the swelling in my chest. Outside, the snow was falling again, gentle and soft. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me to mute the noise of the party just a little. The air was crisp, smelling of pine resin and wood smoke. I looked up at the flagpole I had reinstalled yesterday. Old Glory, the stars and stripes, snapped crisply in the wind against the blue sky. The red, white, and blue stood out vibrant and defiant against the white backdrop of the mountains. I took a sip of the warm eggnog in my hand, feeling the heat spread through my chest. I thought about the dessert. I thought about the IEDs. I thought about the long, lonely nights in the hospital recovering from my injuries, wondering if I had a home to go back to. I thought about the enemy. Sometimes they wear turbans and plant bombs in the sand. Sometimes they wear mink coats and plant poison in your heart. But the mission was the same. Defend the perimeter. Protect the innocent. Hold the line. I looked back through the window. Grandpa was laughing at something one of the little girls said, his face crinkled in joy. He was safe. The ranch was safe. The wolves were in cages, and the sheepdog was standing guard. I touched the pocket watch in my pocket. I could feel its steady, rhythmic ticking against my hip. Tick, tick, tick. Life goes on. I finished my drink, took one last deep breath of the free Montana air, and turned back to the door. My war was over. It was time to go inside and eat. Throughout my time in the Army, I learned that the enemy isn't always hiding in a trench across the ocean. Sometimes the most dangerous threats are sleeping in the room next door. This ordeal taught me a brutal but necessary truth. Biology is not destiny. Just because someone shares your bloodline doesn't mean they deserve a seat at your table. True family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by loyalty, by sacrifice, and by who is willing to stand beside you when the blizzard hits. Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially those who would gladly watch you burn. Now, I'm turning the mic over to you. I know I'm not the only one who has faced a Linda or a Tyler in their life. Have you ever had to make the tough decision to cut a toxic relative out of your life to protect your peace? It's a painful choice, but often the only one. Share your story in the comments below. I read them all, and we are here to support each other. If you believe justice was served today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where no one has to fight alone. Stay safe and watch your six.